All right. I'm going to go ahead and get started. So, welcome to my weekly live stream. Sorry I wasn't here last week, just a little overwhelmed with stuff I had to do. So today I was actually thinking about not live streaming, and part of it is because I've been live streaming the working in a little book. But then I've also been teaching an online class where I've been recording a lot of videos, working in a book, working in a very kind of similar way as I've been working in that little book. So I think I was a little bit kind of um, tired or kind of like, sometimes it's too much of one thing. So kind of feeling like, I wanted to do something different with the live stream. So typically it's a live stream journaling session. But today I wanted to go ahead and work on a painting. And I don't envision this being something too um, too long, but it's something that kind of grew out of something I've been doing every day. So anyway, so I appreciate those of you that can tune in, and whether you're watching it live or watching the recorded version of it. But yeah, so thank you so much for tuning in. And like I said, I wanted to focus on a painting. And some of you who have been following along may have noticed over the last 7 weeks that I've been doing a painting every morning. And it's just something that I started almost 7 weeks ago. It's been 48 days. I think today was the 48th day. So tomorrow would be the 7th week, complete week that I've been doing this. And it's been, I just kind of set myself a goal of like, I wanted to sit down and just do a small little painting, something that wouldn't take very long, and just do it every day. And what was funny is that it kind of coincided with the 100-day project. I actually started a few days before the 100 days project started. But that was kind of my thinking, like, oh, if I could do this for at least 100 days straight. And so I've been doing it now for about 48 days straight. So about halfway there. But what's really interesting is that when I started it, I was just like, I'm going to sit down, I'm going to play around with the paints. I'm just going to like something that's quick, something I don't have to think too much about. And then when you do something every day, what happens is you get onto something. So at first, I was just using my Derwent Inktense paints, and those of you that have tuned in know that I use those a lot. But they're not super bright. I mean, they're even once like, they're a good premium quality or a good quality paint, but they just didn't dry very, very bright, especially on the paper that I was using. So I started using just some like real basic Crayola watercolor paint, the Crayola educational paints, and they're very bright, very inexpensive. They're not light fast, so they're not like a professional quality paint, but I've been doing it, it allows me just to not worry about the paint. It's like I've got a palette of 16 different colors, and but what has happened is that I've gotten onto something. So at first I was just experimenting, trying different things out, and then over the last few weeks I've really kind of hit on something that's stylistic that I really like, and I've been exploring it. So I want to show you some of that first. Let me go ahead and flip this over so that we can see my table. So I'll talk about the paints and everything, but this is the little book that I've been working in, and I've just been painting on the one side of the pages. And this is just a spiral bound journal. The pages are perforated, so the colors do kind of bleed through. So I was, these are the first few that I did, and just kind of playing around with shapes. This is where I switched over to the Crayola. So you can see how the Derwent Inktense aren't super bright, but the Crayola definitely is. So I'm going to flip through. I'm not going to show you every single one, but I just every morning get up, spend 15, 20 minutes, half an hour at the most, and just really was playing around, started doing a lot of these petal shapes. It's a shape that I've been playing around with for quite a while now. And it's starting to kind of coalesce into more recognizable imagery. So very kind of flower-like, I think. So I was kind of doing this kind of stuff. And then what happened was let me find the painting. I think I did it while I was in New York. So I was in New York for a conference, but I still was painting. Oh, it's this one. So this is the first time that I painted something. And because I was in New York and I didn't have a hairdryer, I was like, okay, I want to fill in the background, but I'm like, okay, the red was still wet. So I painted the red spots first. And I was like, the red's still wet, so I don't want to touch it. And so I'm like, I'll just leave this white halo around it. And I really liked that. And so the next day I did this one. And then I did this one. I haven't just stuck with that. And here's one where I kind of went back to some of these shapes. But I started playing around with that and trying some other things. And what I really like this, like with these big fat white outlines, I really started liking that and started playing with it, and just really been pretty much, that's kind of what I've been focusing on. I started doing like tree silhouettes, and here's one of my webby kind of images. And this one's not like it, but again, it's just experimenting every day. But I really got into this, and I've been really thinking like, okay, this is just done on like not the best paper, not done with the best paints, but I really like the results. And I'm like, well, why don't I try something like this on with better paint and better paper? So that's what I'm doing today. All right. So I've got my mixed media paper. So this is the Strathmore 400 series mixed media paper. And I've got really high quality watercolor. I could do this with Crayola, but I want something that's really high quality. And I got these liquid watercolors. These are Dr. P.H. Martin's Hydrus Fine Art Watercolor. It's a liquid watercolor, comes in a glass bottle with a dropper, very intense, very bright. But the great thing is that they are light fast. That means that they're not going to fade much in like regular lighting conditions. So if it's exposed to direct sunlight, yeah, anything can fade. And so since it's liquid, I put it in a plastic palette that has little wells, little cups. And because it's concentrated, I did thin it down. I put like a 1-to-1 ratio. So I put like so many drops of the magenta, and then put so many drops of water in it. So that way it's a consistent color. So I thought I'd go ahead and paint one of those sort of like white outline paintings today. And it's just something that I was like, okay, I just think I want to try this. So let me make sure my brush is clean. Like I said, I've mixed this up so that hopefully the consistency, it's not too dark, it's not too concentrated. If I need to, I can always add a little bit more water. But I'm going to kind of stick with that like abstracted flower kind of design. So what I do is I just start off with the petals, the petal shape, that kind of leaf-like shape. So depending on the color that I've been using, it reads as a petal or a leaf. And this is a shape that I've been playing around with for a couple years now. I actually first started using it about 2 years ago, right before the pandemic and right around the beginning of the pandemic in 2020. And I've got a nice big round brush. I always find it interesting. They call it a round because it is like a round this way, but then it comes to this really nice sharp point. And so that kind of concentration is really good. So I'm just going to paint a bunch of these. I always have to remember, I try to keep my brush a little bit more straight up and down. And that way I can get those kind of petal shapes. So I've been really taken with this magenta color. So this is a quinacridone magenta. It's a color that I've used before in different, like there's acrylic paints that I have that I've used it before. I just really like that magenta. It's not like a super bright pink, kind of a little bit more of a like red, kind of like a more related to kind of a red violet. So what I've been doing, it is really an abstracted, or it's developed into an abstracted flower design. I like having it go off the paper. And I like just having these like big and little petal shapes. It's actually the first time I've painted them with this hydrous paint. So like I said, I was really considering not doing the live stream today. And then I was like, oh, let me try this. And I was like, I had to go out to my garage studio and grab the paints because these were not in my home studio, the one I'm in now. Um, and I thought, well, I wanted to kind of paint it anyway. So I was like, I might as well live stream it. So it's nothing really grand. I'm not trying to get really any kind of shading. I'm really trying to keep the color pretty flat. If it's real dark like here, I can use the brush to try to pick up some of it. And so I have not been sketching these out. These are all just spontaneously painted. So there's something fun about that. Part of it is that I don't want to sketch it in because the color's not really dark. And so I'm afraid that any pencil marks will show. So I have them mostly clustered around up here, all kind of pointing in to this little area. And so what that does is I'm trying to create an area of focus, a focal point. And so this becomes the focal point because the kind of things are pointing to it, things are kind of radiating out from it. I'll also paint a yellow circle behind everything, and that will help really make it pop out. But it follows the rule of thirds. So if I divided my paper up this way and this way, so I had 3 equal sections, and then down and down, this would fall into where this line and this line crisscross. And then that creates a nice focal point. That's something that I learned when I was in high school photography class. And it stuck with me. So I don't always use it, especially with my monsters, but I use it a lot with my journal pages and with my mixed media work. So this paper is about the same size as that little book that I showed you. It's the book is 5.5 by 8.5, I think, and this is 6 by 9. Okay, so I think that's going to be it for the petals. I kind of like having some big spaces that are left, and then I'm going to use a smaller round brush and the yellow. So the yellow is a little bit too bright. I was using this Hansa yellow light. And so I put a drop of a slightly darker yellow in it. So we'll see how that is. Okay. And so what I want to do is I want to leave that white border, and that's part of the challenge. And some folks will probably be like, oh, do you use some kind of masking fluid? And no, I don't. I do everything freehand. Even if I painted the masking fluid on, I like doing it this way. So what I do is I just start off and I paint like, okay, there's where the circle is going to be. I just leave a little bit of a space to kind of leave that white outline. And it's like I just realized like, oh, I didn't like I was making the circle too big and it was going to come too close to the edge here. So what I can do is I can come back and backtrack and make the circle a little bit bigger on this side. And I gotta be careful not to forget to, it's gonna be more of an egg shape. See, trying to talk and do all this at the same time. I'll see if I can fix it. So what I try to do is just take and paint and leave a space that's about the same amount all the way around the petal. What's really interesting is that I've never really been like a flower guy. Like doing flowers has not, well, you know what? I'll take that back. When I was in college, I doodled daisies a lot. Just in sketchbooks and in my notes for college. It seemed like that was something I was always doodling. But it was, like in my more mature style of art, definitely have not really been kind of doing flowers. And I think that's why I kind of like the more abstract nature of these. Because it suggests flowers, but it's not like I'm not trying to paint a particular flower. And so the yellow circle, it's interesting because it can kind of represent the center of the flower. We often think about that rounded center of many flowers, and it's interesting teaching little kids for so long that so many of them, draw these flowers and then, the petals are pink and the inside's always yellow. So there's a little bit of that. And actually the white line, the outline around it is actually kind of taken a little bit from teaching younger kids, because what happens is when they're painting, oftentimes they don't want the paint to touch, right? If the pink is really wet and I touch it with the yellow, then the pink's going to bleed into the yellow. And so kids kind of learn that, and then they're like, oh, they paint and they leave this halo. And even with other paints, like with acrylics and stuff, it's like I think they're afraid that they're going to get like one color on top of the other. And so a lot of times they'll paint and it looks very incomplete. And so I'm kind of taking that notion and then using it though in a way that it does feel complete, because it's really a part of the design, that really broad, bold white outline. So it's not something that's an accident like with the kids. It's more of a design decision. Okay, so I've got the yellow in there. Let me turn this around. So now I've got a blue. So this is a phthalo blue. I have a feeling it's going to be a little on the dark side. A little bit more water in it. Excuse me. All right. So I'm going to use a combination of the little paintbrush and the bigger paintbrush, just because it's just a lot easier to get into some of these smaller spaces. So that's such a bright blue. That's even with it being thinned down. It's very bright, pretty dark. If I spread it out, and so I just kind of want to continue that white line. Okay, so let me grab a paper towel over here. Um, so there's a little dark spot there, and that's just because there's just way too much paint. So if I wipe off the paint, I can take and wipe up some of that dark paint. So trying to keep it a little bit more on the flat side. So using the blue just gives the indication that, oh, this is the sky. You know, we read it as a sky color. If we're reading this as a flower, then this could be the sky around it. So this is like very different than how I normally work. So I am typically working with a lot of layering and building up color and building up darkness, building up value. So this is very different. And, but I find it, I think because of that, I find it pretty interesting to do because we often get caught up in what we're comfortable with, and being able to push ourselves out of our comfort zone is definitely a good thing. And so sitting down every morning and trying to just paint. And so sometimes it's just more, I just want to make some mindful marks. I'm not going to worry too much about painting something that you can recognize. And then other times, it's like when I kind of was working with these petal shapes, and then I discovered this white outline thing. It was just sort of like, oh, I like that. Let me work with that. All right, let me switch to my bigger brush. So the one thing with any kind of watercolor is that it will dry. And so even like what I just painted down is dried a little bit. Um, the the hydrous paint, this paint that I'm using, is water soluble. So I can hopefully be able to blend the paint that I'm just putting down and blend it into what's already on the paper. So that Derwent paint that I like, it's more permanent. So whenever it dries, sometimes there is a very distinct line. So switch back to the small brush, and then loving I love the little papers because then I can turn it in a direction that is a little bit more comfortable. Now, what I find interesting is, this idea of turning your paper as you work isn't obvious to everybody. And I think it's just, we get this notion in mind, like, oh, this is meant to be seen from this one direction. And so even if I'm working on it and painting it, I have to leave it sit in that direction. So this company, this Dr. P.H. Martin, they make another line of watercolors, and it's all liquid, but they're not light fast. I forget what it's called. And then they also do a lot of ink. They do lots of colored ink as well. I mean, this paint is so bright that, I mean, it does look like ink more than watercolor paint. And that's in part because it's a concentrated liquid. So I could try to take that big brush and paint around all the petals. And that's what I was doing at first in the book. So as I was doing this, I would just use that one brush, that really big brush, because it has a very sharp point on it. But what I found is that I'm not a watercolor painter. I mean, I've used watercolor for years, but I don't use it like a traditional watercolor painter. And watercolor painters are they tend to use the brushes. Each brush has a certain tip, so that way you can achieve certain effects. But I never really, with the way I work with my mixed media, that has never really been much of an issue. I tend to be like, oh, I need a sharp point to get in these small areas. I need a big broad brush to fill this big empty space. And so I feel like I don't have as much control yet. I mean, that's one of the things, like with painting every day, is like you start to like get better. It's like I find I have better brush control now, but I tend to have a shaky hand no matter what. And so it's one of the reasons why I'm not a good letterer, is because my hand will shake and things get wonky. But that's part of the style. It's part of me. So, but I feel like with the little brush, I've got more control. That's why I like to at least outline around the petal shapes. And then I can use the big brush to fill in. This blue's a little darker than I'd like. It's actually showing up darker on the video, but when I've been doing the paintings in the morning with the Crayola, they have a really light blue. They call it turquoise, but it's more like a light blue. And so I think the phthalo blue will work well for it. I just maybe need to have more water in it, so it's just a little bit lighter. But we'll see once it dries. It does dry a little bit lighter than the wet, and that's usually, watercolor usually does that. So watercolor oftentimes goes on and it's very, very bright and seems very dark, or maybe intense is a better word. And then it dries and it just seems like it loses some of its intensity. So I think there's something about the water, the wetness, that kind of helps bring out some of that intensity. I mean, I could see down here, it's a little bit lighter, but that may have been just because I was using the big brush. But even over here is a little bit lighter. Okay, well, that kind of kind of does it. It's the first time I've used this. I'm getting used to it. A little bit different than using the Crayola uh, paints that I've been using every morning. But one thing is that this is more of an egg shape, not quite a circle. Um, and the background is really modeled, like, it's not even and smooth. So I don't know. I mean, it's watercolor, so sometimes you just sort of have to like accept that. Um, but it's my first attempt using this kind of paper with this kind of paint. I like it. Maybe not as much as some of the things I like in my book, but yeah, I think it's it's like it's my first attempt. So just missed a couple spaces there. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, I keep looking. I'm like, oh yeah, there's a little white spot. There's a little white spot. And maybe what I want to do is to kind of have it more modeled, like where it's just variations and, some slightly darker areas, some slightly lighter areas. Yeah, we'll see. But yeah, so that's my first attempt. And switches back over. So anyway, yeah, so if you like what you saw, make sure that you leave a comment. If you have any questions or comments or concerns, let me know. But anyway, it's gonna wrap it up for today. So today's just a short thing, but I appreciate you tuning in, and let me know if you have any questions, comments, or concerns. And until next week, so happy creating.